क्या हुआ अगर जिंदगी जरा उलझ सी गई, सोचो तो जरा जंगलों में भी रास्ते तो हैं, हमें भी कोई मिल ही जाएगा। चलो तो सही, चलो तो सही, एतबार भी आ ही जाएगा, आ ही जाएगा।
Yeah, this one gets to me every time, this recording. It's from a talk show that he was on. Oh yeah, it's because of that echoey effect of it. You know, it's like somebody's talking to you from the other side. और वो उसके बोल भी ऐसे ही ना कि, you know, giving you hope and whatnot, कि जंगलों में भी रास्ते तो हैं. It's like that one, उसका था ना McCartney का, when I find myself in times of trouble, Junaid Jamshed speaks to me, speaking words of wisdom, कि जंगलों में भी रास्ते तो हैं, हमें भी कोई मिल ही जाएगा, चलो तो सही. So,
it definitely has a haunting effect, especially the way it's recorded and the message, you know. So definitely, yeah.
Well, is that you know how in Pakistani gatherings and shows they love that reverb, which I typically don't like, but then this time it really worked.
Yeah, it wasn't like overpowering or anything. Yeah, I mean. This almost wants to make me ask you what your like all-time favorite Junaid song is, but maybe we can end the episode on that.
I will definitely answer that, man.
Everyone.
But what the heck, man? Where have you been?
Yeah. यार तो वही तो करने वाला था, मैं इंट्रोड्यूस करने वाला था, बताने वाला था कि भाई किधर है, किधर नहीं है. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome back to Dil Mange Aur. Also known as DMA. Let's just call this season 2, episode 5. We left off, on our second episode of Vital Signs way back in April, when obviously, everything with the pandemic and our lives kind of being shifted in so many ways was just starting to hit. But beg your forgiveness, and definitely, we're all very excited to be back. With you all. I know a lot of you have gotten in touch with us asking where we've been, why we haven't recorded. We can assure you that DMA is not going anywhere. We just, as I imagine all of you had a few things going on, and we've been thinking about recording, and so here we are. We're back. If you haven't checked out our latest season, sure, we've only gotten 4 up on the board, but I think they're really, really great episodes where I think you'll really enjoy them. We've had a couple of interviews, one with Brian O'Connell. Brian, if you're listening, thank you again for sitting down with us. I know a lot of people were really appreciative of the time and the insights that you provided, and for just opening up to everyone. We also interviewed Sherjan earlier this year. He not only talked about Junoon and his dad, but also his own musical endeavors and the sort of talent that he is working with to create new music and new sounds in the Pakistani scene. And then of course we started our series on Vital Signs, which I think is a point of contention amongst us in terms of what is the all-time best Pakistani band out there. But in many ways it's not even a comparison really across the genres and across the taste of music between Vital Signs or Junoon or other bands. But yeah, so here we are, and what we've been thinking about a lot is doing some profiles and about our favorite artists and who else to start with when it comes to Vital Signs other than Junaid Jamshed, who we all miss very, very dearly, and no doubt has had a huge impact not only on the landscape of sort of Pakistani history and Pakistani culture, but also our own lives. So I know you two have spent a lot of time thinking about his life, obviously being impacted by him, and so I'm really, really excited to sit down with both of you to talk about this man, talk about who he was and what he meant to you, And I know, Adibhai, this is going to be a particularly emotional episode for you. I remember the concert that we went to last year with in San Jose with Junoon, and at one point I think Salman sort of talked about his friendship with Junaid, and I think you were just kind of writhing on the floor at one point. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's first of all, they're talking about Junaid Jamshed, and then it's coming from Salman Ahmed. I mean, in all my fandom of Junoon, Vital Signs, I've always seen these two guys together. From both sides of Salman's had his transformations, and he grew as a person, and Junaid definitely grew from one side to the other. And the companionship and the camaraderie that these two had was above everything. And so it's very heavy coming from a tribute coming from Salman Ahmed for Junaid Jamshed. It's very heavy, very overwhelming. तो उसमें यार फिर बंदा, I'm not crying, you're crying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's only appropriate, as we start kind of going down this path of doing profiles on, some of these band members or the well-known pieces of these bands, that we start with Junaid, the man, the legend. And it's only appropriate since we just actually passed his death anniversary a couple of weeks back as well, right? So that's always a time of remembrance and looking back and, just reliving some of these moments that we all went through because of him.
I remember, what was it, 5 years ago, I think now? I think it was December of 2015, right? I remember when I got the text from all of you.
2016, actually. So it's been exactly 4 years.
Was it 2016? Yeah. Okay.
And yeah, please, actually, I was going to ask you guys, where were you on that, fateful day? What did you go through? What did you hear?
Well, I actually got the news, I think, from you all, is what I remember. You had, either you or Omer had texted, and I had just gotten back from a pretty long day at work, and I remember exactly where I was. I was just in my room, kind of, feeling exhausted. I think it was like 10 or 11 at night, and because it was a morning flight that they had caught, right? And so it was a morning flight, and the crash happened, sometime in the morning before noon Pakistan time, so it was still like sort of around, whatever time it was, 11 p.m. or 10 p.m. our time, and I can't even begin to describe. I mean, I think it was just a feeling of, first, obviously, shock and being stunned, and just then just an immense loss. And I think a lot of people talk about this, right, when they lose, sort of favorite artists, or favorite personalities from their era that they grew up with and who had such a huge influence on them, is that one of the most common feelings is that you feel like you lose a part of yourself in the process. You feel like you have lost, a part of your own, sense of self and history and, upbringing or whatever, childhood. And for me, that was certainly the case. I became aware of Junaid Jamshed through some of my, aunts and uncles who were young, back in the 1980s, and were sort of indelibly influenced by that Pakistani pop and rock scene, and Junaid Jamshed was the poster boy, right? I mean, he was at the forefront of that scene, and so they introduced me when I was at a very young age, and so that's how I felt. I don't know how all found out.
Honestly, it's still a haze. I don't remember. It's just one of those things that it's an experience that sometimes you put walls up in your mind, right? You don't want to relive. But what I do remember distinctly is that anybody and everybody across the spectrum that heard about this was shocked, stunned, and saddened, right? It wasn't that it was just his fans from his musical days or his fans from his preacher days, but it was a very communal mourning that happened. And I read an interesting thing recently that really struck home, is that death is one of those things that we all experience in life, and we all experience together sometimes, but it is also the most isolating thing, right? So even though Junaid Jamshed was this icon of the country, and he was mourned by millions all at the same time, yet it was very isolating at the same time, where you felt a personal loss, right? Like you said, Hamad, this is stuff you grew up with. So that was, that really struck with me. And then, with his recent anniversary of his passing, that's something that I was reflecting upon. But yeah, absolutely, there was not a single person that I knew that did not, feel that.
I actually remember that day very clearly. When जैसे सुबह अगर किसी का फ़ोन आ जाए सुबह 5 या 4 बजे, it's not gonna be good news. मुझे फ़ोन आया, my cousin Salman Jaffrey, and so it's early in the morning, my kids are sleeping, my wife is sleeping, तो मैंने उसको कॉल को पहले तो रिजेक्ट कर दी. And then I went straight to the WhatsApp. We have some of these family WhatsApp groups or other text groups and whatever. Then I saw that you guys were talking about it, Omer and Salman, and I think Salman's brother Zawar was, and these guys were already talking about it and posting the news clippings and whatnot. And initially, I was like, I was very tired. I was sleepy, and it would have been, I knew it would have been a lot to deal with. So I was like, I'm gonna deal with this later. I just won't be able to do this right now. And typically, like when I don't get a good night of sleep, my job ka pura din kharab ho jata hai. So I tried to go back to sleep. I don't remember if I was actually able to go back to sleep because I'm going through all the Twitter and they see video websites and whatnot. And so maybe I never did go back to sleep. I went on Twitter actually. And I went on Twitter to specifically look for Salman Ahmed's tweets. और वो देख के फिर मुझे और परेशानी हुई because he was on a flight. He was on his way back from Lahore to New York, or either maybe Karachi to New York. So I was thinking, like, imagine this, in a flight, it's already compartmentalized and like everything's compact and you're kind of in a sardine can. And then when you find out a news like that where you want to kind of just start, banging your head against the wall, start trashing the place, but you have to stay contained in that small space, and you have no space to do that. So I'm like, what is this guy going through right now? Finding out that his soul brother has passed on, and तो वो देख के और परेशानी हुई. But then I remember if I just laid there, maybe looking through more internet articles and social media and whatnot, Pakistani news. थोड़ी देर के बाद जॉब पे जाने का वक्त हुआ. Then my wife woke up and I showed the news to her and whatnot, and then shortly after that I left, and like it didn't really hit me until I went to work and started looking at social media and Facebook and all the outpouring that everybody was going through. And then there's a Indian friend of mine at work, and I told him about this. I'm like, man, Junaid Jamshed died. And he knew these, because he was a big Junoon fan. He was a big Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan fan. Usko Junaid Jamshed bhi bahut pasand. And I told him Junaid Jamshed has died, and he was like, he was really shocked. And he's like, this guy had the best singing voice that I've ever heard. So तो उसके बाद क्या हुआ कि then we just went through the things we went through. I came back home, and one of the biggest problems that I had was, like, I don't know if you remember, but on Facebook for a while, it's been like 10 years that I've been talking about, man, I want to do a tribute show for Vital Signs, because Vital Signs है बहुत कीड़ा दिया मुझे. That's the group that's given like me the most, kira, because they kind of ended their thing abruptly.
It was a premature end.
Yeah, exactly. So मेरे साथ ये था कि I wanted to do a tribute concert for Vital. I was always posting that on Facebook, and then I was seeing all these covers on YouTube, amazing covers, which is still happening to this day. People are always putting up amazing covers of Vital Signs songs, and there's hits on there, there's comments on there, and तो मुझे हमेशा ये था कि tribute करना है. And now it's been 8 years and I'm still trying to do a tribute for Vital Signs.
And it
still hasn't
actually,
happened.
it almost happened this year, but then COVID came through.
Freaking almost happened.
I remember I was actually gonna fly down right for that weekend,
Right,
and then
yeah.
everything started happening. And you know,
So right before Junaid's passing, I was working on backtracks. क्योंकि मुझे पता था अब बैंड वैंड तो बनेगा नहीं, तुम लोग साले हाथ नहीं आओगे, किस किस के पीछे भागूंगा. तो मैं I started making backtracks that I would be able to use and maybe include like one or two of you guys at a time, and just, you know. So I was in the middle of that project when this thing happened, and then this happened, and I'm trying to continue working on those projects, on those tracks, and then like और गाना फिर वही आ गया, एतवार आ गया, और उसमें बंदा संभाल कैसे सकता है अपने आप को, right? तो I'm just not able to do it. I'm starting it, I'm turning it off, I'm taking a break from it. एतवार and तुम दूर थे. I was trying to work on the drums, the bass guitars, and the chords for those songs, and then काम करते करते आंखें भर आईं, तो we have to stop. I'm like, I can't do this right now. I gotta take a break and come back to this. And then that still continues to happen, you know, when I'm trying to work on these songs. You're working on it, and all of a sudden I have to stop, and because, you know, you can't help yourself.
Well, you know,
run by emotions.
Anyway, incidentally, so you know, he passed away December 7th, 2016, and I was actually able to pull up a Facebook post that you had posted that night or that day.
Really?
And, you know, if I may, you basically said, for many years now, Omer Qazi and I, with some friends, have been doing some small gatherings where we'd play songs by Vital Signs, Junoon, and other Urdu bands. Because of that, I listened to Vital Signs songs several times a week. Last night, driving home from work, I was listening to Ajnabi, Tum Dur The, and Chehra to try to figure out what kind of backtrack I'll need to make for me and Omer to play on. Do we just track the drums and bass and play guitars on top of that, or do we also include the synths for the ambience of the song? Which part will I play, and which part should I have Omer play? Do I write up a tab and send him, or record a video of the riffs? This has been a typical drive home from work for the last 15 plus years. I want to thank Irfan Shaukat, Azam Zaidi, Mudassir Ahmed, Junaid Ahmed, Zawar Jafri, and Hamad Adam for jamming with me and Omer on the signs. Rest in peace. I mean, yeah, the impact has been incredible, right? And you know, I guess this is a good point for us to not only emphasize how much it meant, and, you know, I mean, not to sort of knock on anyone who sort of, you know, woke up to Junaid or Vital Signs after he had passed, which is totally fine if you did, but cannot emphasize enough what that man meant to us and what the band has meant to us. And like Omer Bhai said, you know, hey, it was a premature end for them. But, you know, for a lot of bands, like, that sort of story is, or I should say for a lot of legendary bands, right, that leave like the kind of mark that Vital Signs did on Pakistani pop music, it's almost like there's no other way to imagine their story, right, other than the fact that, like, you know, the sort of the fate of, like, you know, breaking up early or sort of going separate ways. It's happened to so many out there. But yeah, I mean, you know, I really want to, you know, let's celebrate his life, and let's look, you know, I want to learn from you all, because I actually, you know, like I said, I was very young, didn't really get into his story too much. I remember there was I might be wrong about this, but I might be just imagining this, but there was a PTV show, right, like that they starred in or something back in the day, and that was my first exposures to them and their personalities.
Are you talking about Music 89? I'm sorry, I'm sniffing too much.
Yes, but they also, didn't they have like some sort of drama serial that they were in?
Oh, yeah.
A small little series. Yeah.
It wasn't a series.
So,
it was
you know, I mean, you know, and there aren't like enough biographies out there, right, that like are accessible for us to read on these personalities. So, you know, what was his early life like? I mean, I know he grew up in Lahore, I think, and, you know, at that time, and we've discussed this before, like the middle class of Pakistanis, like in the urban centers, was, you know, really quite exposed, right, to sort of, you know, Western, particularly rock music. There's a particular history of like Christian artists who brought in jazz music and jazz influences. But yeah, I mean, how did Junaid get into music? I also understand that he, used to recite Quran as well, and came from a moderate family, and that definitely took at least some aspect of Islamic learning seriously. So yeah, tell us.
I mean, I read that in some article or some interview that came out back in the day. I would always, throughout the 90s and 2000s or whatever, I would always read whatever came out on Junaid or Vital Signs or Junoon. So it's kind of a blurry memory, but I think I ended up reading in one of his interviews that Junaid said that मैं बचपन में तिलावत बहुत अच्छी करता था. So, at that time I didn't make much of it because that just showed, okay, so he has vocal talent. But it kind of showed that the kind of upbringing that he had, it was kind of like that the transformation that he would end up having later on. It was kind of, it made sense because it was kind of a return, because he was not far removed from that kind of environment or those kind of people. It wasn't like somebody converting to Islam. It's quite possible he had those type of people around him from before too. It was typically, especially because of the way, there's some level of polarization between the entertainment world and what the general Pakistani traditional conservative society is like. Typically, what I've noticed is a lot of entertainers either come from that secular upbringing, or they either switch to that side of things. And there was a thing about Nazi and Zohaib, because they were like, their entry was through Bollywood, they were UK raised, so there's people would say things like inko to kalma bhi nahi padhna aata, things like that. Junaid's upbringing may be different in that regard, because he was coming from, even though he was coming from an educated background, that's why they had Western exposure and Western music and whatnot. And I think at some point he was known as a Careless Whispers guy, because I think, isn't there a recording of him singing Careless Whispers?
I think they did a whole English album at some point, which is lost in the records, but I think we have a...
अच्छा, वो English music की बात उसमें ये थी कि उसमें उस पर लिखा हुआ था Vital Signs singing songs, and it looked like a bootleg record. It wasn't... didn't look like an official release, and there was some
I think what the story behind that was, it was a demo of some sort, and it just leaked. It was never like an official release or a B-side or anything. But to your point,
that's what I'm wondering too, because back then, when this thing came out, the kids in school were saying कि अरे इनकी नई album आई है, इनकी नई album आई है, लेकिन सारे इसमें English गाने हैं. So yeah, I didn't understand it until I actually heard it, and there was like La Bamba and Walk Like an Egyptian, and it's kind of a weird album, but we later figured out that it was probably
and what Junaid went through is not uncommon either. Abhi recently, just a recent example, Pepsi Battle of the Bands, one of the bands that won in the last season or the season before that, Oj, their lead singer, his name is Abdul Rahman. And, when they interviewed him, he's like, I had a good voice, and Abu ne kaha ki naate wagera padho, right? Get into that before you get into the music scene. So there's always that push, with the moderator traditional, I guess there's this caution, or maybe even a fear that
it's like a schism between the two sides.
Right. And, people try to...
so
you've noticed that, Hamad, right? Like, you've probably seen a lot of that take place in conversations. And...
Yeah. And, I mean, I'm happy to jump around in this conversation because, so taking a step back into kind of, and I always like doing that, right? Like extrapolating from these like little like nuggets and these stories that we have of each of these artists, and kind of looking at the broader implications and broader society. And to me, like, to be honest, when I was growing up, and I always crack this joke right out of all of us. I've been to Pakistan more times, I should say now, more times. Anybody has been there now.
You're not going to say that for very long, buddy.
But I have definitely been there more times, and I've also lived there. That doesn't make me an expert by any means. I'm sure there are plenty of folks who have, obviously lived there, and plenty of those who are listening who live there right now and have lived there for forever. That is the Pakistan that I felt like I knew, right? Like the Pakistan ke bhai अम्मी अब्बू जो हैं मतलब अब्बू जो हैं वो मगरिब की नमाज़ पढ़ने जा रहे हैं, अम्मी जो हैं वो बाहर आ रही हैं, बता रही हैं बच्चों को कि भाई वज़ू करो जाके, and you know the kids will, right? I mean वो जाके वज़ू करके नमाज़ पढ़ेंगे, but then they're also
Which is like
watching,
a very,
you know,
like a common Pakistani household, right?
yeah, like, and but they're also watching Pepsi Battle of the Bands, right? Like Sunday की शाम है, मतलब वो for some reason prime time TV in Pakistan is like Sunday evening, so you know 6 बजे, you know whatever 7 बजे में मगरिब तो खैर इतनी जल्दी होती भी नहीं होगी, but anyway the point, you get my point, right? That like and you know there's like there's beautiful like Makkah artwork around you or whatever, or photos of Makkah, you know that classic, you know, photo that every Pakistani household has of Haram Sharif, and then you know you're watching your favorite bands, and you know whatever, like maybe one of the teenage boys is like sitting there with like a guitar in his hand, you know, and that's the Pakistan that I grew up with, that there was no inherent tension in that picture for me growing up. And you know, so to me, like, it just seemed very natural that of course it makes sense that Junaid Jamshed began his, you know, if I may say, like began his sort of artistic, I guess, like career or his first impressions through like perhaps tilawah, right, of the Quran, because obviously there's melody there, right? And by the way, that's no different than a lot of other like artists who you know, from the Christian tradition and particularly the Black gospel tradition who have come up, right? Stevie Wonder, I believe, you know, used to sing in churches, and that's where he learned his form and his art, and then brought that and infused that into, you know, the way he sang. And so, you know, and I don't know if you all have felt this, but now that I think about it, there's actually some like, I don't know, there's some nasheed kind of vibes that I get from some of the early tracks, right? Like the early Vital Signs tracks of like the very slow kind of ballads that you have, like you kind of sense that, right, of like the kind of extended like lyrics and the, you know, the kind of like really real emotion extension behind
That's
them.
really interesting. I've never thought of it that way.
Yeah, like जंगलों में भी रास्ते, right? Like that to me has a very nasheed kind of like sort of sensibility and vibe to it. And so, you know, again, लेकिन मसला ये है कि for some reason we have, you know, chosen to like create these strict lines, right, between नहीं अगर ऐसे किस्म के मतलब लोग हैं जो, you know, गिटार बजा रहे हैं और, you know, ऑडिटोरियम में blah 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 और लड़के लड़कियां, you know, this and that, तो फिर उसमें मतलब इस्लाम से कोई ताल्लुक नहीं है, जो भी है या जो भी कोई influence नहीं है. And to me, like, that was what was really hard for me. And I don't know if you want to jump ahead to that, because I actually I do want to know, Ali Bhai, like, you know, what did it look like for him to get into music, and then what was his start with Vital Signs? What were the relationships that he had? And also, you know, I really want to get into how he's, at least for me, from my vantage point, I think he struggled with fame. I think he really struggled with like being literally the like most famous artist of his time. But that's what was really hard for me with his, you know, so-called religious transformation, is that for a time period, it really made it seem like it was such a, like, you know, either this or that kind of thing. कि भाई जो मैंने किया पहले अपनी ज़िंदगी में वाइटल साइंस के लिए, वो वाइटल साइंस के साथ वो सही नहीं था. कि that was not, like, I'm now making amends for it. And that's what made me really, I think,
by the way, I want to come back to this and elaborate on this more, but he actually stopped saying that his post or his later years in his religious life, probably 2013, 2014 on, in those years he was very different from this his early religious years. Jo ke hota hai, and you know, we can talk about that, but I want to ask you first that let's start from here. You probably remember when it was announced that Junaid Jamshed has joined the Tablighi Jamaat. How did you respond to that news? Either of you, because I want to hear from both of you.
I feel like this is a setup because you have some strong thoughts on this. I'll just start with saying that I was very young. And to be honest, I didn't know, like, you know, what TJ even was or anything like that, like when that transformation or that sort of like shift happened. But again, as I've mentioned to you all before, and as I was alluding to, I felt very confused. And to be honest with you, this may be a very strong word for me to use, but I felt a little betrayed. And the reason, and I know like some of you feel differently, and I'd love to hear Omer Bhai's thoughts on this, but I felt betrayed in the sense that, like I just said, there was no tension for me between this idea that one could be like, you know, a pop singer and like, you know, engage in like Urdu adab and shairi on that level. Because by the way, Vital Signs, like Urdu shairi was like totally on a different level, and they also did not like, they wrote original content. They didn't borrow, right? They didn't like borrow from past you know, Urdu adab and shero shair. But the point is that you know, for me, I did feel a little betrayed because, I just felt confused. I was like, why? Like, why does there need to be this sort of transformation? Because for me, it just felt like, what's so unnatural about being someone who is a singer, but also at the same time can be, you know, practicing Muslim?
Yeah,
Those are my
for
thoughts.
me, you know, it's the opposite, because that was our world. It was always polarized like that. That you either have one side or you have the other, and rarely can you walk that line in between. And you know, when it did come out that, you know, I don't think it was a surprise, because there were already rumors and words on the street that he was going to Raiwin and everything, and you know, attending the ijtimas and all that stuff. So, but then, you know, for me, it's just like, okay, these are the guys that you, when they knock on your door, you pretend you're not home. So why did he join this particular group? What did they have to offer? So it was definitely confusing. But you know, as time went on, I think the good that he was able to do through that group possibly, you know, maybe probably outweighed any concerns that I had about him initially joining.
That's interesting. So what do you think? What were those positive
I mean,
impacts?
I think Junaid Jamshed, like, okay, there's several artists that have kind of converted, you know, if I were to use that term, went from the pop artists' fame to, say, the religious side. You know, Najam Shiraz is one. Ali Heather had a stint of that for a bit. But the only one to kind of capitalize on that is Junaid Jamshed, right? He was able to carry his legacy from his Vital Science pop singing days into his preaching days, and he became even more famous, actually, if that's even a thing, because of that. So, and then, you know, he was a giver. He took Pakistan's name to new heights because of all the charity that he did, and because he was a lover of Pakistan. Which person? I mean, there's so many people in Pakistan that would just take the chance to move out of the country if they can for better opportunities. But he stuck around. He did not have a second home in a Western nation. He always came back home, and he always did the good work in his home country. And you know, his eventual demise happened because he was on his way towards some charitable thing in Chitral.
There's a lot you can say about his Pakistaniness. I mean, if there's one person, Mr. Pakistan icon type of person, then it's probably him. But and we can discuss that if we want. But with me, मेरे साथ मसला ये था कि Vital Signs, like I said, they were, you know, they didn't finish off things, they left things hanging. तो मुझे कीड़ा था पहले से कि I wanted them to come back, especially because of the new music scene. Like I said, late 90s, with, you know, the way the scene had matured, the bands had matured, and I was so excited about what they could come in and do in that environment, with this maturity, and come back as a unit with Ruhail and Shahzad, and there's a glimpse of it. Couple of demos that Shahi put out, and then the BBC show from '97. But the demos that Shahi put out, they were like really, you know, just really rough cuts, barely not even a minute long, one of them at least. And he put out in the last few years. But it just made me really curious, like, you know, what could have been, especially Junoon kicked it up a notch with the Parwaz, and with the things they did, Junoon did a lot. And at the same time, Hamari jo upbringing thi na, it was very much it was probably just as devout Islamically just as anybody else, but we were always around, you know, people from the masjids and people kind of religious, sometimes masjid imams and whatnot, and attending study circles like halaqas, and having a lot of Islamic information, inspiration, listening to scholars, and तो इतना पता नहीं कि showbiz में जो चीजें होती हैं, the things that entertainment companies and producers put you through, and the common word for it is fahashi. It's what's the Arabic word? Shahawat, I believe. So that's the environment.
So are you talking about like the moral compromises that you have to make?
I mean, we always kind of knew that this is part of entertainment. So somebody like me and Omer, we're learning guitars, we're learning how to play drums, playing in bands. So you'd have to think about making a choice that are you gonna let go of are you gonna cater to your iman, and stay away from all of this stuff, or are you just gonna give in and be, quote unquote, one of them? So that was a contention for us. My struggle with that contention was, we're just playing instruments. In terms of the fiqh of instruments, you guys have done your research, I've done mine, and mine has largely been like inconclusive. But itna pata hai ki there's hadiths on both sides. Some forbid it and some, make room for it. So in that, or looking from that perspective, if a stringed instrument or a wind instrument is not forbidden, then why is it that a person cannot just be a good Muslim and still be able to play music and make his art? Why is there pressure of being engaged in those quote-unquote shahawat? So that was the struggle. So इसमें ये हुआ कि post 9/11 Pakistan was going through a lot of polarization. The conservatives had, especially the religious types, and वो पता है तुम्हें कि they're always on the edge. And they were finally getting a major blowback from the other side, because they used to be the self-righteous ones before, but now the secular side had something over them. So they started pulling the general society towards them, because they had that allegation against the religious people that, these guys are extremists, they're killers. So usme, I felt that there was a large vacuum for people, especially from the cultural leaders, to come in that and bring people to the moderate. Salman Ahmad did a great job there. When Junaid Jamshed went to the Tablighi Jamaat, I felt like, man, we've missed that opportunity. I was like, why can't he just be a good Muslim and still be able to make his music, still be able to make his art?
What's interesting?
Tabligh ka ye tha ki me and Umair and yourself too, we would always be hanging out with religious groups anyway, and with religious groups, there's always camps. And our religious camp was not in favor of Tablighi Jamaat. So हमारे लिए तो वैसी impression सही नहीं था इनका. And one of the things about Tablighis that which bothered me a lot is that the idea of khuruj and gasht is very central to their movement, to their ideology. And when you sit with them, it sounds like that is Islam, or that's at least a huge pillar of Islam. As soon as you leave their space and go to another Islamic space, then they don't even, even if it's like Al-Hadith or Barelvi or Ahl Bayt or, Islamist, Ikhwani, or Tanzimi type people, they do not have that ideas, and they don't even talk about it like it's a thing. So there's some things to be suspicious about Tablighi, inka tariqa sahi bhi hai ki khalat hai, pata nahi kya hai. So when Junaid becomes part of that and leaves the other spaces where we were, that's what kind of bothered me on a personal level, कि ये बंदा हमारे यहाँ से निकल गया. अगर ये होता हमारी तरह तो कुछ कर सकते हम लोग के साथ. We could have had a space where there was just some moderation that you could make your art, do your singing, and still be a good Muslim.
So that's really interesting that you bring that up, of like because I do think the early 2000s, the timing of this, right? I mean, I think he was Vital Signs was already kind of breaking apart in the late 90s, right? I mean, the last album, what was it? Hamtum, 1995? release.
हम तुम के बाद कुछ singles आए थे.
90
दिल मांगे और ज़्यादा.
Yeah, it was in 95,
was the
right?
last
But I
single.
mean, and there is speculation that they were still like kind of, you know, it wasn't like Hum Tum was going to be like it was intended to be the last album. It was, you know, it was just going to be obviously it was going to be another project, but then things kind of unraveled for whatever reason. But the timing of the fact that 9/11 happened. And it's interesting that you bring that up of like there was a gap, and I agree with you that there was that gap, and you have your own feelings and thoughts around why, ye banda hamare haath se nikal gaya, however you phrased it. I didn't quite examine that as much, and that's an interesting point. I actually have thought about the fact that 9/11, I think, did two things. I think it prompted someone like Junaid, who was already struggling with, straddling these different worlds of, pop music and being kind of like this obviously very attractive, handsome poster boy of like the genre and like essentially Pakistani youth culture at the time.
वो था ना कि दुपट्टे फेंकती थी लड़कियां उसके ऊपर. That's gotta be disturbing.
Right. So yeah, right. I mean, and that stuff going on, and I would argue that, like, to be honest with you, I mean, their Vital Signs music was so timeless and classic, and frankly, just like very safe, like from like a moral content perspective, but whatever. I mean, there's obviously a spectrum on that, but and so I think it prompted someone like him who was already struggling with that to start to like wonder, okay, all these like, because I mean it was seen as a Western influence, right? It was seen as a Western genre, and you all of a sudden, because that's what happens in those moments, is that you kind of don't have like, you have like extreme reactions that happen in response to these sorts of events. Like initially, right, everybody kind of begins to like I don't know, two examples. When Trump was elected, like all of us were like freaking out, right? Like, I mean, some of us were like, oh my God, like there's going to be a Muslim, like, not just database, but like we're going to have concentration camps, right? Like, and over, I mean, obviously it wasn't a great 4 years, but like, those were the initial reactions, right? And then when COVID hit, right? COVID was like, oh my God, we all kind of just sat at home forever, right? For like two months, didn't even go grocery shopping, some of us, and had them delivered or whatever. But now, then we kind of got used to things, and we kind of figured out how to like, navigate things. And I think 9/11 prompted this like, instinctual or like visceral reaction amongst Pakistanis to be like, oh my gosh, like, we have, we've been kind of parroting the West so many times. And, or all throughout all these years. And like, here's Junaid Jamshed thinking about like his own career. And then he's like, wait, I need to like make amends for this, right? The other thing is that, I've gathered that there were some economic struggles, right? And a lot of the concerts and shows that they used to do in the West, in the UK, in America, were a great way, obviously, for them to continue to have income, right? Besides, like, I mean, albums in Pakistan don't really, garner much revenue. But there was a lot of at that point, like there was a lot of distancing, right, from like Pakistanis and Pakistani citizens and artists and all that stuff. And then like, not to mention that even though they probably didn't have to register, but like NSEERS was in implementation. Pakistani citizens had to like register with USCIS and like, and so I just, yeah, I hear what you mean, but to me it almost does feel like, even though as much as like I said, I felt a little betrayed, it makes sense. It makes sense as to why someone like Junaid would sort of go in that direction, because the Tabligh, like, not that it offered like some sort of, Tabligh is not, I mean, we might have our thoughts about Tabligh, but
Tabligh's reputation, because they were the peaceful ones, they were strictly peaceful,
right? Exactly. And so
they had no.
So not to say anything about them, but like they offered still a little bit of a different alternative vision, right? Other than kind of like the Western, the kind of culture that was steeped in Western culture, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then that's one sort.
So, I mean,
that was one of our thing, because culturally, because of our upbringing, the Islamic centers and the imams and whatnot, the people we were spending time with, there was a relatability issue. Like, I could not relate to Tablighi.
So it seems like you felt comfortable with that then.
No.
You felt like it was a missed opportunity, but you felt comfortable with it. Given
I love the fact that Junaid became religious, and because look, and he talks about a lot of this, the kind of environment he was in, the kind of corporate pressure, Pepsi, and the things he was dealing with. It was not a healthy environment, like for anybody. You'll see a lot of Western artists like Dave Chappelle, right? These guys have all gone through this, and when the money gets involved, and the kind of things that producers put you through, and like for example, like Jasate Waslama, right? When he's singing Tajdare Haram or the Asmal Husna, it's beautiful, right? And he can do it as good as any devout religious person, or whatever. But when his music videos are made, that's Smith Perra, there's girls dancing with less clothing on, and there's sexualization of women in these videos, and it's happened to all the artists, like from Ali Haider, Sajjad Ali, Atif Aslam, Ali Zafar, whatever, Abrar al-Haq. They've all have that. It's not always because of the artist preference. A lot of it is because of producers, the companies, the channels, and the industry, right? It's the industry that makes it happen. So artists sometimes get stuck in that. It's not always... so when you're Junaid Jamshed and you're already struggling with the emptiness of the industry, it's there are things going on that they're very much counter to any Islamic teaching. The indecency and the vulgarity, because that's all 100% is against the spirit of Islam, right?
Well, and I mean, the interesting thing is his own growth also shows us that he went through an evolution, right? I mean, like you said, I mean, he kind of initially was like sort of really isolating himself and really getting into kind of just the nasheed kind of genre, but then he kind of started to bring himself back.
He did, because, which was very amazing. Initially, he's doing his nothing and whatnot, and he's strictly hanging out with a certain kind of people. So, and then what happens is, if you watch his interviews in the last 3 or 4 years of his life, he's hanging out with all kinds of people. He's making records with Salman Ahmad. He sings Naya Pakistan, Chand Sitara. At Isna, Salman Ahmad and him sang songs on a guitar. So he does start to loosen up. I think a lot of it, or like to think a lot of it, has to do with the possibly, and this is speculative, by the way, on maybe when some of these Islamic organizations from the West, like Islamic Relief or ISNA, started reaching out to him to bring him to perform for fundraisers and whatnot. He probably got exposed to some of these people that have grown up here, and maybe some Muslims from the other camps too. And I know some artists personally. Like I was friends with the couple of guys from a group called 786 from Michigan, and Junaid Jamshed performed with them. And one of them was a good buddy of mine, and I was always like, man, I hate you. I'm jealous of you because you got to play with him. And I was like, that should have been me, right? And then there's another group called Native Deen, the 3 African American brothers, and these guys got really close to Junaid Jamshed. One of their lead rappers, Naeem Muhammad, he talks about Junaid Jamshed quite a bit. He spent some time with him, and Junaid actually gave him songs. They had a good relationship.
What was their collaboration like?
It was good. Umar, remember that song when you said it sounded like Jab Se Hue? The Gana Banaya Tha, right? I think they took a Vital Sign song, and anyway, but that's the kind of people Junaid was coming across and hanging out with. So I like to think that that's what made him loosen up a little bit. And a friend like Salman Ahmad obviously would bring him around and get him out of a uniformed environment. लेकिन उसके इंटरव्यूज जब देखो ना तो he says the Vital Signs के जो गाने किए थे, solo songs भी जो किए थे, in his past life, he has no regrets that he's done that. So a lot of times when you go on YouTube and people are putting comments that Junaid Jamshed had let that live, so please do not post these songs. Junaid himself said that he has no problems the songs that he's done before, but he definitely had a problem with the environment, with the Pepsi and the corporations, and there's interviews of him claiming that people should check out, and the environment of the sharab and women and whatnot. And I think any decent Muslim would have a problem with that, and they should. And because of my musical ambitions, I could not pursue that seriously because of the kind of things that existed in that environment. So, but Junaid did come around. एक सीन इसका बड़ा मजे का था कि जिसपे लोगों ने काफ़ी शोर मचाया था कि these guys were doing a promo for Yaad perfume. It was a signature perfume, Wasim Akram. So there was a whole event. Usme Hadiqa Kiani was there. So what happens is these guys were, and Junaid describes this, they were about to take a picture and Hadiqa just comes and grabs his hand to hold his hand. Oh, picture खींच गई. And then that picture becomes viral and then, उसने बड़ा शोर मचाया लोगों ने कि अरे देखो औरतों का हाथ पकड़ा हुआ है. And that's another thing about religious camps that there's always another rival camp that's going to be after your camp, right? So they want to bring you down. So Junaid, like what Amir Liaquat did, Amir Liaquat's from a rival camp. And Junaid had to leave the country because of what he did. Junaid had to spend a couple years outside of the country because of something he said, and Amir Liaquat exploited that and put a spin on it and said that he committed blasphemy. He made a blasphemy allegation, and Junaid was attacked physically at one of the airports, I think Islamabad or Karachi airport.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then he started getting death threats as well.
Yeah.
And he had to leave the country for.
So yeah.
वीडियो है वैसे बड़े थोड़े फनी है वो बंदे जब मारते हैं वो आगे कह रहे हैं अबे ये इसको तो हम ढूंढ रहे थे ये इसने अम्मा आयशा के बारे में ये कहा इसको इधर लाओ पैन और वो गालियां वालियां शुरू हो गई वहाँ पर. It's kind of Pakistani style जो होता है.
Yeah. I didn't know that. Yeah, I mean, I didn't know that. I never heard the audio, I guess. So okay, I know we're really.
Environment घटिया हो जाती है चाहे मजहबी हो or whatever it is लोगों की वजह से घटिया हो ही जाती है. There's something out our people have brought in a lot of gandagi into all kinds of environment, whether it's मजहबी environment या फिर moderate हो जो भी हो, unfortunately.
हाँ बिल्कुल. इंसान ही इंसान को people are at the end of the day why others are miserable at the end of the day. So we got to wrap up, but one thing that we haven't really touched on, and I just want to kind of quickly, just because there was a little bit of a gap that I remember between Junaid and Vital Signs kind of like drifting apart, and Junaid really launching into more of the kind of tablighi, like Naat, kind of like his Naat self in the late 90s. I mean, what exactly happened there in terms of him deciding to go solo? Because it's not like he left Vital Signs and then immediately had this transformation and then started releasing like albums where it was just knots, right? It actually ended up being he actually ended up releasing some solo albums where it was like of the same pop genre.
It's kind of
his own stuff,
chronological
right?
thing that if you probably have to take it back to the 90s, क्योंकि Vital Signs were never a stable band. Nusrat Hussain आया चला गया, Salman Ahmed आया चला गया, Rizwan आया चला गया, Amir Zaki. And then Rohail's issue was that he was, in Junaid Jamshed's words, Rohail was not a live musician, he was a studio musician, because the kind of things that he used to do with his equipment. And so a lot of that had to, or led to Vital Signs' breakup, for lack of a better way to break up, in that in that process, Junaid Jamshed was like, this is my bread and butter. So he was like, I think what happened is these guys were doing a tour of either US or UK, which Rohail Hayat did not join because of some issues that he was going through. Amir Zaki was with them. And I think during that trip, Junaid probably thought that, because the way that they left things with Rohail, there was a good chance that Vital Signs was going to break up at that point. Usi Dauran, I think that Junaid took a detour to UK and got together with Biddu, who was a producer of Nazi and Zohaib, and he made that album Tumhara Aur Mera Naam. तो उसमें अच्छे गाने थे उसमें, like different too, like production is completely different from whatever Rohail would do with Vital Signs, or later on with what Kami Ji would do with Surapar and Dil Ki Baat. It was very different. There's a lot of pop and disco, a lot of disco and like reggae and a lot of those 90s beats. And लेकिन जब ये when Junaid comes back, he does call Rohail up, and then Vital Signs was back on, but slowly they make Hum Tum, and then after Hum Tum, Rohel wants to be in the studios, and Junaid was like, man, I do work, man. So he makes us rapper and continues in the solo thing. उसी हलचल में फिर the exact moment where he was when his transition started, an incident in his own words, where he was driving somewhere and then he saw a group of tablighis and he stopped and he got out of his car and he greeted them and उनसे कहा कि यार आप मेरे लिए दुआ करें. तो what happens is that tabligh jamaat that goes back to the masjid they were at, and they start talking about amongst themselves that, you know, अबे हमें पता है कौन मिला, वो जुनैद जमशेद जो है ना सिंगर, उससे मिल के आ रहे हैं हम लोग. तो उसमें फिर what happens is there's a guy there who turns out to be an old school friend of Junaid Jamshed. So now this guy, he goes, he finds Junaid's number and he starts calling him. And he keeps insisting that I want to meet him. Oh, I want to meet you. But Junaid doesn't want to get together because he's like, you know, Tiga Purana dost hai. Junaid did recognize him immediately and he was actually glad that he called, but he was like, लोग आते जाते रहते हैं, वो टालने की कोशिश कर रहा था कि अब कौन किस तरह क्या काम लेके आएगा, ये वो जो होता है. But this guy was persistent and he kept trying for a month or two, and he eventually gets a chance to go to Junaid's house and sit with him. So when he gets there, Junaid hadn't seen him, so he's not expecting him to be in a tabligh uniform, right? So he sees him in there with the long beard and the pagdi and the uche shalwar. So Junaid gets curious and they have a long conversation for like 3.5 hours, and then this guy starts taking Junaid to the majlis and masjids, and Junaid eventually meets Tariq Jamil. So there was a whole process when Junaid was kind of bouncing back and forth between his work, because the Pepsi contracts were still there and he still had to do work. So what happens?
Yeah.
So
I mean, I don't think it was just because he still had those contracts outstanding and needed to, you know, meet his obligations. I actually think it was because these are all different parts of him that he probably struggled to reconcile, but still could not get away from, right? I mean, in 99, Usraha, but it comes out and, you know, like you said, he's got these great pop tracks, which, by the way, that album involved, you know, it still had Rohel Hayat, it still had Salman Ahmed, you know, producing and helping out Shoaib Mansoor, you know, so I mean, his connections to those artists were never lost, you know, and those friendships were always remained. You know, so I mean,
if you listen to the song Usraha Par, you know, there's definitely a message of transition there, right? Okay, you know, go on a different route, just stop this nonsense.
Right.
And Dil Ki Baat album, Umair, you've talked about this before. You can actually see his transformation taking place in those songs.
I always say Dil Ki Baat was a goodbye album. That's just a farewell. You listen to the lyrics, listen to the tone of the album.
It was pretty clear, wasn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, if anybody's listening with intention, you know that this is him saying, "This is it, guys. It's my last foray."
उसके बाद ये scene हुआ कि he was obligated to perform in certain places. He was singing Dil Pakistan, one of them, and somebody threw a dupatta at him and he stopped the show. And he was like, you know, these things have to stop and ये नहीं होना चाहिए. उसके बाद फिर announce कर दिया उसने कि then, you know, I quit music. But he had an amazing Naat career after that, and the kind of some of the people that we know from the Islamic community and people from different races. जब इसका इंतकाल हुआ तो, you know, there's this buddy of mine, Raif Hajjaj, who's a Egyptian American nasheed singer. He was very upset. He put up a post about it. He played with him. And the Omar Reagan, the actor, comedian, African American Muslim, he put up a post about Junaid Jamshed because he had met him and worked with him on something.
And, you know, he had...
So it's a different world and a bigger world that opened up to him.
He had more Naat albums than he did music albums combined with the band and solo career. So I think
and all are gorgeous.
Yeah, Naat albums came out to about 10 or 11, and I think musical albums were like 8 or 9, something like that.
Wow. Okay. Well, you know, we're running on time.
Like, I want to do one thing.
I feel like...
Have you guys ever met him in person? Tell me about that.
it was chaotic, man. He came to the masjid. I mean, so this was when he was the most accessible. You know, when you're part of a band.
You're talking about the O4 in Garden Grove, right?
Yeah. So when you're, you know, I'm just saying as a point, when you're part of a band, you just go backstage and you get lost in the VIP tickets, and you know you don't get you're not accessible. But when he started doing his philanthropic work, and he became way more accessible, he would be at the masjid speaking and you know, reading his naat, and you'd be in the first row right there with him. And afterwards, he's sitting there having lunch or dinner with everybody, and he's right there. So I mean, that's as close as I got to him, was just to, you know, kind of shake his hand. But he could not have done that in his during his singing career.
I think you left early that night because I actually got to.
Oh, you guys went to his hotel.
I wanna have Ahmad say something. That I want to tell the story before we sign off.
Yeah.
No, so I've seen him live in concert, but never really had the chance to engage with him and personally meet him. But I mean, I can just say that I was around 9 or 10. We've mentioned this auditorium before. I think it was Jordan High School's auditorium back in the day, and just the feeling of excitement and it to me, it was like a part of Pakistan was like here where I grew up, like in America, and like that feeling to me was just really, really incredible. Truly a childhood hero of mine.
Achha, so the event that Umair's talking about in 2004, it was in Orange County, California. The central masjid to the whole community, the Islamic Center of Islamic Society of Orange County. The Imam resident scholar there was Dr. Muzammil Siddiqui, who was kind of a heartbeat of our community here. They had, or I don't know if it was some other organization like Islamic Relief, but they had brought Junaid Jamshed and Saeed Anwar for a fundraiser. तो उसमें हमारा एक दोस्त था यहाँ पर, we've mentioned him before, Faisal Bulero, the guy who's kind of taught us music. He used to play for Junaid's band. तो उसको मैंने फ़ोन किया कि यार जुनैद आ रहा है, इस मस्जिद आ रहा है, तुम पहुँचो वहाँ पर, ठीक है, you should come and see him. So now we get to the masjid, obviously, and we sit through his bayan. I actually, before the bayan actually started, there was a Maghrib prayer before then. He came in and literally probably sat 5 feet from me. और उसको क्या होना था, फट गई मेरी, और क्या कर सकता है बंदा. It's Junaid Jamshed, he's sitting 5 feet from me. उस दौरान लोग आ रहे थे, फिर हाथ मिला रहे थे उससे.
Talk about wanting family content.
Man, I want to use the accurate language, right? चलो, anyway, so लोग आ रहे थे, हाथ मिला रहे थे, they were saying welcome and खुश आमदीद and whatnot. फिर नमाज शुरू हुई तो वो पहली सफ में चले गए. And I'm kind of I'm moderately religious. I'm more of a back saf kind of guy. I'm not the first saf guy. क्योंकि हम लोगों को फ़ौरन नमाज के सलाम फिरते घर जाना होता है. तो फिर बयान वगैरह शुरू हुए. उसके बाद they were having dinner. There was 2 halls there, one for men and one for women. So Junaid probably went to the women's area first. उसमें my wife is there, हमारी बेगम थी वहाँ पर. तो जब वो ऑटोग्राफ लेने गई वहाँ पर, तो there was a मजमा था ख़वातीन का. So she actually started. She stood right next to Junaid the entire time and started moderating the whole thing. Like she would grab papers from the sisters and handing it to him as he would sign it. So she started managing the whole thing. तो उसके बाद क्या हुआ कि थोड़ी देर बाद he came to the men's section. और उस दौरान our friend Faisal was there. और तो मैंने क्या किया कि I walked with Faisal with my camera, and I was making a video of this whole thing, right? Faisal goes to Junaid's side, and I don't remember if they were eating or still signing autographs, but there's other people there. So Faisal taps him on the shoulder. Junaid turns towards him and just kind of smiles and says Assalamu alaikum and turns back. And then Junaid does a double take, turns back, and he goes, Obe! Zor se usne bola. और फौरन पकड़ के ना इसे give him a huge hug. So उसके बाद क्या हुआ कि बातें होती हुई थोड़ी सी, फिर मैं और फैसल बाहर चले गए. And you know, Junaid's entourage is always around him, so on his way out, as he's got to go back to his hotel, so मैंने just ऐसे ही फटके कह दिया कि यार जुनैद भाई फैसल खड़ा हुआ है, कुछ पूछना चाह रहा है. something like that. So Junaid goes, Faisal, यहाँ हो यार. And then they started talking for a little bit, and Junaid gave his phone number. He's like, यार यहाँ ठहरा हूँ, इस number पे call करो मुझे फौरन. So when Junaid does that, and then he leaves, and then what happens after that? Faisal does call him, and so he takes us to Junaid's hotel, and we stood outside his hotel room and chatted with him, and took pictures with him. And
Man, I guess that's a good point for us to just wrap it up then. So guys, a couple things when we wrap. First, I'd like you to just kind of throw out your one song that you think captures, or doesn't even have to capture Junaid, just your favorite of his, and then we'll just in his memory we'll end with a Fatiha for him. So Omer bhai, what's your favorite Junaid song?
Yeah, it's hard. I think we did this for the Vital Signs episode, so I'm not gonna pick any Vital Signs songs. So I'll stick to Junaid's 3 albums, and of those 3, there's 2 that really stick out. Okay, Jagire, obviously because of Salman Ahmad's on there, and an epic guitar solo, right? And that's just a glimpse into what Vital Signs could have been if Salman Ahmad maybe stuck around, right? So that's what could have been type scenario there, and it's a great song, right? And then the one that really does stand out for me personally is from the Dil Ki Baat. It's called Samna, and I'm always attracted to dark and sad things. There's probably some hidden mental illness in there that's causing this, but Samna just has such a sad and tragic, just starting from the tone to the lyrics to the आवाज में दर्द जो है ना,
he's got the बिल्कुल
जो दर्द से जो गाते हैं वो, and then and there's some certain lyrics in there that really stand out to me. अनजाने देशों में अनजाने लोगों में कुछ दिन तो अच्छा लगता है. I wrote about this on his passing, how these are the lyrics that really
there was a Vital Signs song like that too, बिछड़ के जाने
वाले. Exactly. So, and he's always had this, every single album had like a dark song, but Samla definitely, with the flute and the drums and the lyrics, especially jo dard jo hai. So that always stands out to me.
All right, Adi bhai.
For me, I'm not gonna pick a Vital Signs one, but for his solo work, and Umar already picked Jagire, but I didn't think of picking that anyway. I was gonna pick Tum Kehti Ho.
Oh my God, that was the one that I was gonna talk about.
चुरा लिया तुम्हारा गाना. चलो कोई बात नहीं. From his नाते, I like मोहब्बत क्या है. मोहब्बत क्या है दिल का दर्द से मामूर हो जाना.
Man.
So Hamad, what about you then? Now that your song's been stolen.
मेरे खत मुझको वापस कर दो, वापस कर दो. Man, that one is yeah. And then Usra Hapad, I think obviously it's kind of a basic choice, but for the reasons that you mentioned that I think a lot of folks don't realize, just kind of setting himself apart, and really kind of, I think it was a song that showed he was still in his kind of self-exploratory mode at that point. So
Usra, the song is iconic. Yeah. It may not be a favorite for a lot of people, but it's iconic. It has its impact.
Absolutely.
It has its purpose.
Absolutely.
And then, I don't want to end this without mentioning the song Jana, the Wild World copy.
The Cat Stevens.
The Cat Stevens,
copy.
Yusuf Islam. It's a great song. I think.
Yeah, we didn't get a chance to get into it, but if you look at Cat Stevens' journey and Junaid's, there's some parallels in there that worth attention. Yeah. That's worth attention.
And then there's not every day that Bollywood and Pakistan tend to take songs and make it their own, copy a melody. But Jana is one of the very rare instances where it actually worked really well.
I think it was an excellent rendition. I don't know who did the guitars in there. Could have been Nabil or Dil Bukhari.
I think it was Nabil. From what I heard, it was Nabil, but it could be, it could be Amir
Nabil,
Zaki.
and Nabil's just a great guitar player.
Chalo.
All right, guys, let's do a Fatiha for Junaid Jamshed, and we'll wrap.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
All right, y'all. Well, thank you for rejoining us. This is Dil Mange Aur. We're your favorite Pakistani pop and rock podcast. Send us your feedback, and we'll keep you posted on further episodes. But hope you enjoyed this listen. And as always, hit us up on Facebook and Instagram. All right. Take care, y'all. Assalamu alaikum.
Allah Hafiz.
Allah
Allah
Hafiz,
Hafiz.
guys.